So today we have a fun little video talking about the visual glow up of the Final Fantasy VII franchise from the OG FF7 to remake all the way to Rebirth, focusing specifically on those polygons and their counts. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you're new here and you'd like to stick around, you can subscribe. It is much appreciated and helps out the channel a ton. So this article comes to us from the PlayStation blog, where they sat down with the main character modeler and lead character artist Dai Suzuki for the Final Fantasy VII remake project, and they just kind of talked about some of these specific characters and their polygon counts. And this is honestly kind of fascinating, and as someone who isn't super well versed with polygons and how many polygons go into a character or a piece of the environment, this was actually a pretty interesting read. So we start off first with the main character himself of Cloud Strife. Now the original model, the battle model for Cloud in FF7 OG, was approximately 900 polygons, and that's just the battle model. That's not taking into account the little chibi character of Cloud that we see running around in the overworld or in some of the environments. This is specifically Battle Cloud. Now what's really interesting is that they don't make mention of the character model we see of Cloud at the very end of the game when he goes one-on-one with Sephiroth. That is a much different, even more detailed, kind of close to Final Fantasy VIII looking character model that we see of Cloud, where you see every inch of detail on his clothing, his armor, his sword, his hair, his face, and it's the same for Sephiroth. And I think the reason they were able to do a much more detailed model in that section of the game is because the characters are essentially in just a black void, and the segment itself is super short, so they could probably just pump in a ton of more polygons into those specific models. Now moving on to Final Fantasy VII Remake, Cloud comes in at approximately 110,000 polygons, with the Rebirth version of Cloud being 220,000 polygons, so they pretty much doubled that. Dai Suzuki goes on further to explain the process of designing Cloud. He says, "When people think of Cloud, most think of his gigantic sword and his unique hairstyle. Because it is so iconic, we needed to put special effort into creating Cloud's hair for Final Fantasy VII Remake to properly express his personality. The hair was an extremely high priority element, and in fact accounted for half of the total polygon count for the whole model. In 7 Rebirth, the hardware has been changed to PS5, allowing for a higher polygon count to be used than in 7 Remake. So half of Cloud's character model is literally devoted to his hair, and you full on see it in this game. There are so many cutscenes in this game where you get a really great close-up of Cloud, and you can see all of the fine detail in his hair. So those polygons are going to work. And if you really pay attention, you can pretty much see like every individual strand of hair, and it's not just static hair, it's actively moving. It has its own physics. If you're in an area that has wind, you're gonna see Cloud and his hair moving, along with the other characters, for example, and it's super well detailed. And hair is not something that is easy to do in games. A lot of companies really struggle with it. One of the ones that I always point out when I'm talking to friends is the WWE 2K games. Visually, those games can look really great, especially if one of the wrestlers has really short hair. But when it comes to a wrestler with long hair, the hair tends to look really bad. It honestly just kind of looks like they took a bunch of ribbon textures and just planted them onto the skull of those characters. It looks really awkward and janky, but to do really good hair is very difficult, and Square Enix has come quite a long way with their hair physics and hair design in their games. Team Ninja is another one that usually does pretty well when it comes to the hair design, and then of course the folks over at Capcom with their ridiculously versatile and powerful RE engine do hair pretty well, especially if you look at the RE remake games. A character like Leon, who has some pretty iconic hair, looks really good. He's got that, you know, that comb over swoop, that pretty boy look, and you can see the different strands of hair. And they even went as far in RE4 Remake to have a specific mode that changed the hair physics in the game to make it look more detailed and actually have more strands of hair that animate instead of just having like a static section of polygons on the character model's head. So it's really impressive what they can do. It looks really good, and the hair in 7 Rebirth in particular, Cloud's, just looks really good. That spiky hair chocobo design just is so iconic, and they put so much work into it that half of that character model is all hair. Up next, they go to Red 13 as well as Cait Sith. So the original Red 13 character model in FF7 came in at about 900 polygons, with the Rebirth version hitting 120,000 polygons. Now to get to Cait Sith, The original combined Cait Sith with the Moogle in FF7 was also around 900 polygons, but in Rebirth, the cat portion of Cait Sith is 100,000 polygons, with the Moogle coming in at 230,000 polygons. And a lot of that has to do with the fur. Cait Sith, as a cat character, he's super tiny, so you have to pump maybe fewer polygons into him, but he's primarily all hair. There's obviously like the details on his crown, on his hands, on his boots, but majority is that hair that extends all the way to the tail. And the thing that really impressed me most was actually the Moogle. When Cait Sith first shows up and you see the Moogle body, for a split second I thought, wait a second, did we just cross over into CG territory because of how detailed the Moogle body itself is? And that fur detail was something that I never really thought about from the original game, you know, because the polygons and those textures in the OG games were really smooth. So for whatever reason as a kid, I thought the Moogle portion of the body was just kind of like this smoother kind of texture. So seeing it in Rebirth and it has all of this fur on it and it's a big boy, he's a chunky boy, it's super impressive again how they're able to get that fine detail in the hair work and in the fuzz work, which is again not easy to do. So Dai elaborates by saying Red 13 and Cait Sith's entire body is also rendered by the placement of many hair cards. They do go on to say that cards represents polygons that are hair or fur-like, and they just use that term to describe that stuff. Since their fur is one of their unique characteristics, it was necessary to not only just let their hair cards grow, but also to pay attention to the flow of the fur. Their blocky appearance is adorable in the original too, but don't you just want to pet the new Cait Sith? 100%. Not just Cait Sith, I want to cuddle him. I want to give the Moogle body a big ol' hug. If they could make some sort of like Moogle beanbag chair, that would be sick. But with a character in particular like Red 13, he's got very short hair, so you tend not to notice a lot of the details in the body of the character. But when you get up close and you look at the face and you see the mane of hair that stretches from his head all the way down to his spine, it is very, very detailed. The face in particular, man, there's so many details in Red's face that you can honestly just kind of miss if you're not paying attention. From the two-tone look of his fur on his face, from having the orange where it gets closer to his muzzle and his mouth where it's more white, where a lot of the whiskers would be, the little chin hair that he's got, and even his hair, how they're in like little pigtails with this jewelry on them with the feather there. I have a dog, so I spend a lot of time looking at her face because she's my baby. So they did a really great job of just kind of overall animating how hair reacts to wind, to water, what have you, for a character like Red 13, who is basically a lion dog cat hybrid. Now up next is a section that I was really excited by when I read this article, and this has to do with character facial animations, because Rebirth has some of the most expressive faces I think I've seen so far in a Square Enix game, in particular the character of Barrett, which we will get to in just a second. But Dai Suzuki elaborates by saying polygons are essential not only in depicting a character's physical appearance, but also in expressing their inner personality. When expressing emotions through facial animation, facial distortion is greatly influenced by the total number of polygons. The characters in the original version had relatively emotionless faces, but in 7 Remake and 7 Rebirth, their facial expressions allow us to convey the emotions of the characters much more powerfully. And I bring up Barrett in particular because they have some really great photos of the different expressions that he has on this blog. But in the game in particular, I think Barrett might be the best looking character in the game, from his overall design, the details on his weapons, on his clothing, his facial hair, but his face in particular. Barrett is probably the most emotive, expressive person in that game, from happiness to anger to confusion. He's just such an expressive character, and that's just kind of who the character of Barrett is. And again, he's voiced brilliantly by John Eric Bentley, which, you know, also lends to amplifying the facial emotions and textures. But when you get a close-up shot of Barrett in particular, you can see the detail on his face, from the facial hair to every pore on his skin to the facial scarring. He is so emotive, and there were so many times where I looked at these cutscenes and thought to myself, this looks incredible, because I feel like maybe at a glance, some people might look at Rebirth and go, okay, that doesn't seem like too big of a jump from Remake. But there's a specific section in Rebirth where they show a cutscene from Remake, and then they cut back to the character models in Rebirth. And that's when I realized these characters actually do look substantially better, especially Barrett. And I don't know if I have the footage of this. If I do, I'll put it in the video. But there's a scene in the game between Song of the Turks where he's talking to Rufus. And there's a close-up shot of his face, and you can see all of the detail in his mouth, from the lines on his lips to the stubble on where his facial hair would be. You can see those pores and how sometimes when you shave, there's just like little pores that still have bits of hair in there that just will not come out. It's really annoying. You can see that on his face. So all of that texture and the polygon work is nuts. And the fact that we've come from the PlayStation 1 era where we had these emotionless, smooth looking characters to having consoles that can pump out this amount of polygons without, you know, making the game struggle is super, super impressive. And the one we will end on here is a monster. This happens to be the big old snake creature we see in the marsh, the Midgar Zorm, or Midgar Zormer. I can't remember how they pronounce it in the game. So the original one in FF7 had about 3,000 polygons, with the snake in Rebirth coming in at a whopping 260,000 polygons. And if Tetsuya Nomura had his way, this snake would probably be like 500,000 polygons, because he has stated in previous interviews that he wanted the snake to be even bigger than what we got in Rebirth, which would have been pretty nuts. I don't know how that would have worked with physics and the environment that you fight him in, but I think he came in at a pretty good number because he looks pretty detailed and very menacing. So Dai Suzuki says, next, let's take a look at the modeling of the monsters. Midgar Zorm's numerous spikes are modeled all the way down to the tip of its tail. These spikes, which were absent in the original version, make its silhouette even more menacing. These details play an important role in conveying to the player the feeling of incurring lots of damage from the spikes when the creature lashes its large tail. And I really do love the design of the Midgar Zorm. It's kind of similar to the one we see in Final Fantasy 15, and I believe there was actually a few different versions of the Midgar Zorm in 15. You had the first one you come across, which kind of has like a bluish purple hue and like a gray belly to it, and then I believe there's like a whole valley. This is a side mission you can miss, I believe, because it was timed, but there's like a valley of Midgar Zorms. Some are brown and more akin to looking like the one in 7 Rebirth, and then you have the traditional ones, but they all kind of have like that cobra hood to them, but the detailing on the Midgar Zorm in Rebirth in particular is just next level, from the scales down to those spikes that they talk about. And again, it really does add this feeling of kind of dread and threat from the snake, because it's one thing to get wrapped up by a snake, but when you're getting wrapped up by a snake that looks super rough and scaly and spiky, that's a nightmare in and of itself. And looking at the detail work on the face of the snake, it's so intricate. The things that go into it, from the different colors of the scales all the way down to like this headpiece part of its head, which is built into the snake. They almost kind of look like ears or some sort of like ram horns. And then there's like this big white spot on the top of the head, and then the fangs, and then you're getting into the mouth. But just looking at the detail of the snake, how large it is in the game, the animation on it, it's super impressive. Again, how we can go from the OG games all the way to what we have nowadays with the technology, and really kind of pump out these characters and these monsters that have so much detailing to them that look incredible. And overall, I think Rebirth is a very impressive game. Now, in terms of like textures and stuff, obviously in the open world, there's going to be some stuff that just looks like straight butt. That's just the nature of open world games on Unreal Engine. Part of the process, unfortunately. And I'm sure they could alleviate that by adding higher resolution textures, but then you're exponentially increasing the file size of the game. And I think most developers want to stay away from having games that are super big, unless you're like the Call of Duties of the world, which end up being like 80 million thousand gigabytes in size. But for the most part, the game looks really good. And again, the things that we're focusing on are the characters, the monsters, all of that detailing, and it looks ridiculously good. So the next time you boot up Rebirth, maybe go into the menu here and take a look at some of the characters, take a look at their weapons, and see how detailed that stuff actually is. Or maybe you want to go back and fight the snake. Pause the game a little bit, just kind of rotate the camera. Look at that snake, man. It's menacing, it looks terrifying, and it looks really good. And it really, honestly, it makes me excited for the future of the Final Fantasy franchise, just to see how tech will just inevitably get better, how the developers learn to use the PS5 hardware even more. And if we ever see these characters come back on like a PlayStation 6, maybe we could have a Cloud that has like 1 million polygons and 500,000 is reserved specifically for his hair. So with that being said, that is the video. I am Curious Corduroy. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think of the overall kind of like tech of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and the character models and the monsters, and just overall just the visual fidelity of the game, because I think it's pretty impressive minus some of the blemishes in the environments in the open world. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.